today, you can actually put your questions into the chat box. Everybody is muted, except me, hopefully. And put those questions in the chat box, and at the very end of the webinar, we can address those questions. Or if you don't feel comfortable, or if a question comes up later on related to this topic, again, give me an email or a phone call, and then we can get those questions addressed. I think we'll have plenty of time to cover this whole, all the material here today within an hour. So if you do have to run out to another meeting at 12:30, I think you'd be able to do that. A few other tidbits of information. This is specific to the state of Minnesota because we are going to be covering information on how you can be in compliance with this issue in the state of Minnesota. Or if you've already gone through the process years ago and you have a no exposure certificate, the process on how to update that information and renew it before it expires, which is going to expire April of this year, 2020. Another information to pass along is that if you're curious as to going to other kind of seminars or information related to this topic that's specific to the state of Minnesota, I've already attended a half-day session. And the format that they're pushing people is that if you want information like this, if you need a permit and you need more help and information, you want to go to a class, you have to register through the University of Minnesota system to register for a class. Half-day classes that I've already attended are $160. So I just thought that it'd be a good opportunity for us to cover specific information for the printing industry, for members for free, and non-members for only $20. All right, so why don't we get started here? And let's see here. Oops. Okay, so again, we're covering specific information. Oh, the other thing to keep in mind is that some of this information will apply to other states in the United States of America. It's an issue, the stormwater issue, that has actually been in effect through the national EPA system, but every state may be a little bit different on how they administer the rules to this whole stormwater process. But we're going to focus mainly on the state of Minnesota over here, and it relates to the stormwater rules and significant materials. We're going to talk about how to keep pollutants out of the stormwater, who's covered, what industry is covered. And basically you have two options in our industry, to go with a no exposure option or to go with a full permit. So you only have two options to go down this road. And we do have a countdown to no exposure, because if you have a current certificate now, if you do look at it, if it's posted in your work area, it expires April of 2020. So that's why there's a lot more discussion going on in this issue, is because those certificates are expiring, and there may be people that are out there that have no idea what I'm talking about and have never done this process yet. And that's okay too, as long as you get in the system and get your, hopefully your no exposure exclusion, so you don't have to go through the permitting process. So what this is relating to, well, first of all, let's talk about who does it related to? And basically we're specifically talking about printers, publishers, and all related industries. They use the old SIC code system, but we have progressed to the NAICS code system. But if you can go back to the SIC code system, there's a common SIC code for us in the printing industry that we can use to get all this coverage addressed. But basically anybody in these industries. So if you know anybody who isn't even participating and listening in on this webinar, that are in the newspaper industry, that are producing books, greeting cards, maps, periodicals, coupons, anybody related to printers and publishers, anybody in Flexo, anybody in Screen, anybody doing newspapers, in all those industries need to address this issue on stormwater. So what are we talking about over here? We're basically talking about how do we assess if we have exposure for materials that are stored outside of our buildings or activities that are outside of our buildings that could have some sort of environmental impact. So basically, when there's things that are stored outside of our building, when it rains on that stuff, or if there's snow on that stuff and it melts off, all that stuff, if it's going to be washed away with the rainwater, will go into the storm sewer system, which leads to the creeks and rivers nearby, or it goes directly to a creek or a river or a lake or a pond nearby. And all those materials that may be washed off of stuff that's outside of our building is not treated to water, and it goes right into those rivers and creeks. And that's basically the whole concept to this stormwater issue. We're stuck in an industry like many, many other industries where we need to do an assessment to see if we need a permit because we got stuff outside there, or can we go to this no exposure exclusion process so we don't have to get a permit. So that's what we're talking about here, is things that are outside of our building and how it's going to be affecting our nearby rivers, creeks, ponds, and things like that. So what are we specifically talking about? I got some photos over here of gas pumps that may be outside of people's buildings, old junk that's outside of our building, maybe storage of paints and inks and chemicals and cleaners and solvents, things that are outside of our building, which could have a significant impact on the outside environment. Because again, even if it goes down a storm sewer, it's not going to get treated. It's going right to a lake or a stream. And if there are people that love the outdoors, I think you'd be concerned about making sure that that's not going to impact our fishing industry and so on and so forth. Other materials that are outside, things that are stored outside, like scrap metal bins that are open, particulate matters. So on the far right lower corner there, you'll see equipment and things that are outside the building. And if there's paper that is coming out from, loading and unloading of compactors and things like that, those pieces of paper that are floating around outside of your building may get washed into nearby creeks and rivers and things like that. These are things that we need to be aware of and that we need to control so that we can fit into that no exposure exclusion process and not get that permit part. But we will talk a little bit about the permit. So again, what is no exposure? What it is keeping storm water off of significant materials and sticking that stuff or having those industrial activities outside of our building, protected by storm-resistant shelters. Now, if we can go down this no exposure exclusion process, then we can get a reprieve from that permit, and it's going to be good for 5 years again. But it doesn't mean that, okay, we fill out this form and we're good to go and we don't have to care about what is outside of our buildings. Typically, when Kathy and I go around to do audits at printing facilities, we will take a look around outside the building to see if we can keep that no exposure exclusion for the company that we're visiting. So think of this in the future too, where you just can't say one and done, who cares about it in the next 5 years? And we'll talk about other people that are going to look at our buildings maybe in the future too. So what do we talk about storm resistant shelters? Well, the easiest one to think about is anything that's a completely roofed, walled building or structure, like these buildings that you see here. If you can stick this stuff in a building, you're good to go. But that may not be the case for all of our printers and companies that we're working with out there. One of the things that we don't need to stick in a shelter in the state of Minnesota, again, I remember working on this issue with Iowa, a little bit different over there. At least when I checked a few years ago, Iowa doesn't allow dumpsters outside their buildings anyway, but we're talking about Minnesota here. And as far as I'm aware of with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, I'll throw one acronym out there, MPCA. I might throw that term out there. Again, that's the regulatory agency that's driving this issue. We can leave those dumpsters outside the building. Take a look at these pictures here. Top right picture photograph over there, they've got to be closed and sealed. Then you see those bottom photos over there, and then you see the red circle with the red line through it. Those are bad things. Drain holes got to be plugged, and you can't have the lid on the bottom right there. You see the lids open in that dumpster. Those are bad things. You can have these dumpsters outside of your building, but you can't have those photos down there on the bottom of the slide that you see there. They got to be closed. So again, dumpsters, there's another photo on the left side of this slide over here that you see that's partially open. Right now, you don't see any rainwater on it, but the inspector people, if they're looking at buildings, will take a look at this stuff and say, yeah, but rainwater can get inside this dumpster the way it is right now, no matter what the material is in that dumpster. And rainwater will get in there and it'll wash through the dumpster, overflow, whatever, come out a drain plug, and it'll contaminate nearby storm sewers or rivers or creeks and things like that. We also got trash compactors. What I'll take a look at some of the facilities is that they'll get all their paper scrap, trim scrap and stuff like that, squash it up in a compactor, and then when they're unloading that stuff, you'll see some paper scraps floating around outside there. So my recommendation has always been when I'm walking around those facilities is to document and establish some sort of periodic cleaning system so that those pieces of scrap and paper are not going into the rivers and the creeks and things like that. So that's another area to take a look at if you have activities that are outside your building that might produce scrap paper. They're pretty big enough so they can be swept up easily enough, but to put a process in place so that typically it's cleaned up on a periodic basis. Here's another photograph, and you can see the black arrow pointing to the bad dumpster. Again, it can be outside, but with the lid being open, that's not a good thing. And I realize that when people throw things in there, they're going to forget to close the lids. But we need to make as best of attempt as we can to make sure it looks like the dumpster on the right side of this slide here that you see that the lid is closed. So let's digress a little bit here and take a look at this photo. This is not in the printing industry, but again, this affects a lot of industries that are out there. And there are some people that got to go down the road of getting a permit. There may be some printers out there that might have to go down that same road too. Anyway, this is a junkyard. Junkyards that are out there that's got scrap parts, scrap metal, things like that, they're out of luck. They've got to get permits. And this is a little bit that I want to talk about in this process here is why you don't want to go down this road. So what the EPA has set up are sector-specific requirements. So if you do have to go and get a permit in the printing industry, what you need to sample for when it rains on your property may be different than other industries like junkyards. But what we got to do when we go down this process of needing a permit is someone's got to run out there periodically throughout the year and collect rainwater from the property that's draining from our property and then compare it to see if those pollutants coming out of our property either exceed or are in compliance with the sector-specific requirements for pollutants from our industry. So not only that, not only do we have to collect samples and then maybe have to refrigerate the samples, get them on over to a lab in a certain particular period of time, but we need to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan that has a map, that has inspection frequency of the stuff that's outside of our building. We need to have documented training for employees who are going to be doing the inspections on our site. So it's a lot of work. The other thing to keep in mind, even though I'm trying to push companies to get to the no exposure exclusion process, actually some people at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency like this also, because they do not have very many people that are at that facility that are running this whole program. They've got basically 3 people, haven't changed that too much over the past few years. And they're spending a lot of time on a lot of the companies that have the permits and don't have a lot of time spending on the no exposure exclusion facilities that are out there. So to summarize, it's a lot of work if you got to go down the permit process. So you have to apply for a permit, or you have to go to the certifying a no exposure exclusion process. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, as you see this slide popping up over here, for those facilities that have already completed this process and have no exposure exclusion permits, and you also had a card, a certificate card that you would print out. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But you had a paper form that you filled out with information and you faxed or you mailed it into the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency or MPCA. they're not going to accept this stuff anymore. That's why this webinar is so important, because I want to talk about how the process goes to try to get your permit in place or to get it renewed so you don't have an expiration date that's passed in April. So again, if you've done this system over here with a paper form, nope, can't do that anymore. But I will tell you at the end of this webinar, the process that you got to follow to get this thing done. The information on here is still going to be good and acceptable too. So you put in there building owner, and then there's a bunch of questions and things like that. So the information is still good. And you're actually in a little bit better spot if you have done one of these things before, or it's in place, because when you get to their electronic system, their e-services account system at the MPCA, a lot of those fields on their electronic form will be already populated with the previous information, so it makes your job a little bit easier to do. So what are the benefits of the no exposure certification? There are no fees. And don't get too confused about this when you go through this whole process, because they've kind of mishmashed them together, where there's a no exposure process and there's a permit process, and they say it's $400 and how do you send your check? There are no fees with this process. There are no annual reports to complete and send in to the MPCA. There is no sampling that you need to conduct, that you should be conducting at all from your property and sending it in. There's no requirement to have a pollution prevention plan with that stormwater permit process. And overall, there's a less impact on the environment. I know there's a lot of people that just want to get this job done so that they're in compliance with the law. But ultimately, this is what we want to get to over here, is have less of an impact on the environment for things that are outside of our buildings, that, again, get rainwater, snow melt on it, and get washed into the creeks and the rivers nearby. One other thing to keep in mind, too, I'll digress from time to time when I go through these slides, is I remember when I made the call over to Mary West at the MPCA, I said, okay, we got a dumpster right outside of our office building over here, and it's an open dumpster. It's got all sorts of stuff in it. What's with this? You know, do we have to do should this building be doing anything about this? And the reply was, no, they're not in an industry sector. They're not in an SIC code that this is covered. So you might see office buildings not doing the stuff that we have to do, or looking at it or whatever. It's just the way they set up that regulation, is they picked a lot of industry codes that need to go through this process, and office buildings like the one that we're in over here at PIM, they don't have to care. All right. Hey, here's a question I think you probably want to know about. Who can inspect me? Okay, even if we do this, or some people in our company don't get it and they don't really care, who are the guys who are going to come out and yell at me or get our company into trouble? Okay, this is the slide that talks about, like I said, the MPCA is basically the agency that's going after this. They only got 3 people. There's Samantha Adams, who's new to the process over here. But there's Mary West. She's been with the program for quite a few years, and I got her contact information coming up. Don't worry about that. Then there's another guy who's on construction, because again, a lot of construction sites have to go through this whole process too. But there's not a lot of them to cover the whole state and all these different industries and the people that have got to do permits and do the sampling and things like that. But they could go out to do inspections of facilities. And my slide over here talks about from complaints. So if you're in a residential neighborhood, you got a neighbor who doesn't like what you're doing, whatever it is, a grumpy employee, they would go and investigate companies to see if you're in compliance with this whole stormwater issue. So they might go out to do inspections from complaints from neighbors, other companies, what have you. Another thing to keep in mind, I do tend to save stuff. This was a few years ago, because again, this is not a new issue, even though some of you may think, oh, it is a new issue. And let me just read from you from an email that I remember one of our printers got them scared, because in the email it said that recent MPCA staff inspections at several facilities that had certified for no exposure exclusion have been found to have industrial stormwater exposure. Because this violates the permit's no exposure requirements, these facilities are out of compliance. So that got some people kind of scared. Maybe other people didn't care too much about it. But in any event, there's a possibility that they would go out to take a look and see if people are just saying, I fill out the form. I don't really care about this kind of stuff. I want life to move on. But they also in that email talked about common issues that they did find. For example, open, unplugged dumpsters that can leak out, in their terms, garbage juice when stormwater gets in them. Now, the one thing that I thought about is that, well, there's dumpsters that might have industrial material in it, but there's other things that have food waste in it. Didn't matter to the MPCA. A dumpster is a dumpster. It's got to be closed. They also talked about having bins outside that are uncovered that contain scrap metal in them. Not a good thing. Trash compactors might have a hydraulic leak or contents that are falling out of the compactor during loading or unloading. I talked about that a little bit earlier when you see paper scraps floating around and things like that during an unloading process or just when it's getting filled up from the compactors. So keep in mind to take a look at trash compactors. If there are any hydraulic leaks that are out there, have somebody address that issue so it's not leaking all the time and leaking down again to a storm sewer or nearby creek or river. So this was, again, an email that was sent out a few years ago that MPCA at the time decided to take a look at some of these no exposure facilities and see if they're in compliance or not. Also on the slide here, you see our county hazardous waste inspectors. When I did go to that half-day seminar that was at $160 at the U of M, the comment was made that in Hennepin County, for those facilities in Hennepin County, your hazardous waste inspectors are a little bit tougher than maybe the other counties or maybe even the other state inspectors on hazardous waste issues. But when I talked to Mary West maybe a couple of weeks ago or so, she said that actually the other counties, so you got Dakota, you got Ramsey County, that those other inspectors that usually come into your facility and take a look at compliance issues for hazardous waste issues may add on to their agenda, and Hennepin County has definitely done so, questions about stormwater and what your company is doing on this issue. So again, be aware that there might be these kind of people that are floating around. I would guess that it'd be more the county inspectors that you'd see more frequently than, again, someone from the MPCA on this issue. So overall, keep these ideas in mind. Practice some good housekeeping, especially outside of your facility. If there's things that contaminate your outside activities, clean those up promptly. Look at moving materials and activities indoors and into existing buildings if you can. And also, if you have to go down this road, we can talk about this later on, on an individual basis if you need to create some other new stormwater shelter areas. So again, we've talked about some things that you can keep outside, like the dumpster story, but it's a very difficult one for us to address because there's going to be people that are going to have some open lids after they put stuff in that dumpster and forget to close it up. So again, keep in mind to try to keep those lids closed so that if there's rainwater that goes into those dumpsters, it just doesn't overflow and go down and outside of a drain plug. Okay, here's the nuts and bolts of this whole process. So again, if your facility, I'd urge you to go down this no exposure exclusion process. I think I scared you enough not to go down the permit process. Here's contact information, Mary West. I've got her name and phone number and stuff like that there too. She's local. Her boss is actually out of Baxter, Minnesota. And then there's a guy in construction who will never help you out anyway on these issues. So it may be very, very difficult to get a hold of these people at the state agency. I know of other printing companies that have told me that when they try to contact them to find out, where do I go to get this information? How do I get this no exposure? They go down the wrong road and they start thinking they got to cut a check for $400 and they get a permit. So it gets a little confusing. But again, this slide and the next few slides are going to be the most helpful slides, I think, in the whole webinar, or some of the most helpful ones. That website is the one you got to go to get all the information and how to get your no exposure exclusion permit process in place. Again, don't worry about if you never did this is the first time you've ever heard anything about it, just get it done. If you've got one in place or what already, and it expires April of 2020, again, you've got this month in March. I think the timing of this is great because if you did it right away, there was a little bit of problems in this system to try to get it done. So you go to this website here. Don't forget about that website. You know, what I did here on the next couple of slides is I broke it into 2 slides because when you go, again, back to that page that I just showed you before with that website, you're going to see on one page, on the one screen here, this slide and the next slide. Okay, now let's look at this slide over here because that's what you're going to see on their website, unless they changed it already. So the second item over here talks about industrial stormwater e-services guidance. That's the second bullet item on this slide over here. This is going to be a nice thing to click on to get the kind of guidance information that I had in this webinar over here. It answers a lot of questions as to what you can store outside, how you can store it outside, if you can't store it outside. That link also, again, Industrial Stormwater E-Services Guidance, will give you that kind of information. Now, the next line down there is access to the online application service. It's got that HTTP, RSP, PCA state. That's the link over there to get to the e-services portal. I'm going to have that in the next slide too. That's the only way you're going to be able to get this no exposure stuff done and get it renewed if you got one already. You've got to set up an e-services portal account with a username and an ID number. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's where you got to go to get this stuff done. Again, they're not taking any papers or nothing like that. You got to get your account registered right there. Now, the next thing that's kind of nice that they did, because like I alluded to you, these guys with the MPCA are shorthanded, and even at the U of M seminar that I went to, they don't even speak for the whole thing. So they've contracted that service out to the U of M people. But they've stuck this training video, and that's kind of neat. I've gone through that too. So what I've done is specifically done this for a printing company, so I know closer as to what this process is going to be for you if you've never done it before. But that training video is kind of nice, kind of guides you through the process of how to fill out the form. But it again has the information about what to do when you have to fill out a form to get an actual permit. So don't get too sidetracked on those kind of slides and video information that they've got there. So again, on this slide here, I'd recommend that you go to the e-services guidance one, general information, boom. You got to do that e-services portal. You got to go there to set up your account and get it all done. Training video is kind of nice, walks you through the process on how to fill out that form. All right. Also, when you go to that website, you're going to see that top part on that page and the bottom part of the page. It says 10 steps to compliance so that you can see the slide easier. I cut out steps 7, 8, 9, and 10. And again, because they got these two things mishmashed together here, don't worry about step 4. You're never going to do it. So look at step 2. That's got some good information about, again, how to certify for no exposure. So it's got some general information in step 2. But don't go to step 3 and don't go to step 4. So don't go thinking, oh, I got to do all. No, don't do that. So then when you go to step 6, that is your link again to that e-services portal. It'll show you how to get to the e-services portal and how you can set up an account. So I just wanted to show you exactly how you get into the system to get this job done. All right. So other handy information that I thought I picked up when I did this for this printer to really see what it's going to be like for everybody out there. Make sure that when you get to the questions that have the section in that questionnaire that you're going to have to answer is called no exposure exclusion questions. Make sure you answer no to those questions, because if you start looking at the question thinking, well, maybe that's a yes, we can't do this then. So you better stop right there and make sure you can cover all those answers to be no in the no exposure exclusion questions. So you got to make sure that you answer no. The other information I didn't even put on this slide over here because they ask for contact information and billing information. Billing, you're not going to pay anything for this again. But make sure again that you answer no to the no exposure exclusion questions. You may wonder when you go through this process, they're going to ask for what sector are you in? What's your SIC code? Okay, everybody here in this webinar is in sector X, as in X-ray. That's our sector they got us pegged into, which is printing and publishing. Now, if you got to pick an SIC code, you might have to go back to someone in accounting or whoever's got this stuff. You might have different SIC codes. A common one is 2752, and that's the one that we are into for general lithographic printers that are out there. So a lot of printers in our industry are 2752 people, and it's a common SIC code, but you might have a different SIC code. But again, it relates to anybody that's involved in printing and in publishing. Another thing to keep in mind is when I went through this process, this is worse than a bank, I thought. They ask 5 security questions. You got to make sure that you do know who your favorite football team is, or other kind of personal questions, and then make sure you write them down, because you might need 1 or 2 of these questions when you try to do the electronic signature part in this process. But they do ask for 5 security questions, like I thought was worse than a bank. Anyway, and then you should get an email back from the MPCA when you complete this process. And then what you want to do, if you want to print out something, you can print a copy of the record. One thing for people that have already gone through this process, or if I helped them or Kathy has helped them go through this process, the process before was when you completed this process years ago, is that there was a certificate card that you were supposed to print and post with your other postings in the facility. So there is no certificate card anymore to post. I didn't know that unless I asked Mary West that question. Anyway, so if you want to print something, in case you get one of these nosy inspectors that are out there from Hennepin County on your hazardous waste stuff and they go down this road, you could print this out and say, we done it already, we're fine, we're good to go. If you want to produce, or if you need to produce something for them to take a look at, if they go down that road with those questions. So there will no longer be a certificate card for you to print. So this is based on information that I got from Mary West and the MPCA people over there. Who knows, maybe they might change it, but if you get into the system before April and get this stuff in their database and set up with an account and stuff like that, you'll be good to go. All right, so here's our contact information. Again, that's me there, Paul, with my email, phone number, and Kathy's email and phone number. And again, you can go to our website to link up with other information you may be looking for on environmental or safety, stuff like that. So we help out on specific items like this stormwater or other environmental issues, or occupational safety and health issues, OSHA issues. There's always some things that are popping up in those areas. And feel free to connect with us. So, let's see here if all right. Let's take a look and see if we have any chat box questions here. Let's see. On to more chat. And let's see here. All right. Let's go to, let's see, okay. All right. Looks like what do we got? Okay. Well, here's a question that has come from someone from an industry that primarily prints on vinyl. I do not have paper or screen printing. Do I need this? Yes, you do. Basically, it covers the whole industry sector of litho, screen. Good question. Keep asking whatever questions you want to in this chat box. It doesn't matter. I may have covered it or not covered it, but ask away. So it does cover that industry if you're printing on anything. And you'll still need to go through, set up your account with the e-services portal with the MPCA, check all the boxes, and you're good to go. So just make sure that you don't have stuff that's outside your building that could impact the stormwater when it rains on stuff that's outside your building, dumpsters, things like that. Okay. Pallets. Oh, that's a great question. Pallet question. Wonderful question. Was that from Kathy? Very good question, Kathy. See, that's why she works here at PIM. Okay, so pallets. What MPCA's got a problem with pallets is more so, again, if there's inks and solvents and stuff that are on things that are outside the building. So if you have grungy pallets, used pallets that stuff may have been spilled on, ink, chemicals, stuff like that, they're not gonna like having those kind of pallets stored outside your building. If they're clean pallets and it's just wood, you know, clean wood and it's in good shape, they shouldn't have any trouble with having clean pallets stored outside. So generally what you want to do is make sure that you get those pallets out of there. I know a lot of printers will usually say, yeah, we don't sit around too long. Well, get them out of there. So again, you don't get a nosy neighbor looking at your outside facility and see that there's a dumpster out there, and then there's pallets out there and some old equipment out there. That's going to encourage somebody to make a complaint, maybe over to somebody to take a look at your facility. Let's see, what do we got? Oh yeah, how to cover that. Hey, okay, now there is a way that you can actually have a tarp that'll cover over stuff. MPCA's guidance is generally you can do that for less than 30 days. So they do allow temporary covers over things. Otherwise, if there's a dumpster, you know, for scrap metal, it's going to have to be open and closed, and or a smaller one. It's just, I mean, you could maybe do a temporary cover over a scrap metal dumpster, or get a cover over it and keep opening and closing it when people throw stuff in there. No two ways about it. I think the MPCA people are probably looking at more of the scrap metal facilities on this issue, but if we got them, got to cover them up some way, shape, or form. So let's see. Okay, if you're leasing part of a building and there are other businesses that are not affiliated with your company that store out things, will this affect us? Yeah, I think what happens with printers, whether own a building or lease a building, they're still looking at that printer as responsible for their operations and their activities. So you still should go through the process and fill out the form, and even though you don't maybe own the building itself. So if a company only laser prints with toner, and they are even considered, okay, and no inks are used, or they even considered to be a printer or publisher. I mean, really, if your SIC code has got you as a printer or publisher, and it's a wide range of stuff, still got to do it. It really doesn't matter what you're doing in that building. It goes by the SIC code, by the company and what your primary manufacturer of. And if it's printing material SIC code in the 2700 series, or NAICS, if you need to convert that to, you can go and Google it and convert your NAICS to the SIC code if you need to do that. But I would do it too, even though you're a laser printer, it's still something that you're going to have to do. Let's see. All right. And again, I don't think it's that big of a deal if you go through the process and just do it. Unless that one time of a few years ago, they started looking at a few of these no exposure exclusion facilities. This wasn't specifically for printing. When I read from you that old email that I had, it was basically all sorts of other companies that are going down that road. So they probably took a drive around and said, we got to make a statement here. Let's see, after laser printers, anybody else? Let's see. Ben put that note in there. Any other questions? Very good. Ben's pretty good here too. like I said, if things pop up later on and you got questions, you can email, call. Okay, temporary construction dumpster for a 3-week period. I would say, even if it's on your facility over here, tarp it up, cover it up, because they're looking at our SIC code. What do we got outside? If it's a construction dumpster that's outside, we're stuck. So, yeah. Again, like this example I gave outside of our office building over here at PIM. It's like they've got a construction dumpster. It's never covered or closed. MPCA doesn't care. It's not an industry code that they care about. Sorry. Let's see, anything else after temporary construction dumpster? Um, yeah, all right. Um, so, like I said, even though they're kind of shorthanded at the MPCA, I think they've done a good job at having that video. And if you know where to go to get this stuff done, it works okay. But I just thought, why should everybody be spending $160 to do what I did and cover this in a webinar? Okay, signed company. Are we to not be able to have any signage stored outside? Ooh, that's a good question. If those signs are going to be used outside anyway, let's say that's your product that you're making, and they're gonna be exposed to rainwater outside anyway for the customer that you're going to give them to, you'd be okay. If it's things that are going to be normally able to be used outside for your customer, then having them outside would be okay, because they're going to be exposed to rainwater when you get them sold over to the customer.
Would it matter if it's inventory to be sold, or if it's
I think if it's
thrown away?
Yeah, I mean, if it's in the only part that it might be a problem is if it's not a finished product yet. Where you're storing things that need to still get painted, and there may be something that may come off and get washed off of that sign. The canopy or party tents, like covers, work for covering bins. Yeah, that would work too. However you can cover the stuff up. Again, what the MPCA is looking at is 30-day max for those kind of temporary covers. And the main thing is making sure that it doesn't get rainwater on it and snow and melted.
It doesn't have to be sealed to the sides, it just has to be covered.
Yeah, right. So you want to make sure that it covers over the whole top so it doesn't get a lot of rainwater inside, Strap it down a little bit over the edges, I think would be good enough, good to go. All right. What is the facility ID? Well, I think if you refer to the SIC code, it would be, the 2752 NEICS code is like a 323114, 113, those kind of things. Otherwise, when you're going into the system, you can choose if this is a question pertaining to your system. Yeah, the application asking for the facility ID, you set it up. So you pick whatever you want to do. What I did for that printer is I actually picked their printing company's name, because they ask you for different characters, alpha and numeric. And so I picked the company's name and I picked the number 1 after it, or whatever it is. And then you pick the facility ID, and then you pick the password, and they'll ask you to repeat the password and that kind of stuff too. So you pick it. And I did it so it'd be easier to remember. Will you be emailing this presentation to us?
Yeah.
That's an affirmative from Mr. Ben. So that's good too. So let other friends know about it, that slides and video.
Audio.
Yeah, and as far as I know, when I asked Ben this question earlier too, because I like to look at details, he said I'll be there for quite a long time, because this issue is not going away. I'm not going to say anything political. Ben's smiling. So anyway, but I think it's going to be with us for a long time.
So for PIM members, it'll be on PIM Connect, so they can log in to view it at any time, or it'll also be emailed out to everyone. So
Okay. So you'll get you an email if you've registered over here. Okay, canopy would only meet the requirements for temporary 30 days. Yeah, that's basically what they're looking for, is that they'll allow for temporary use for canopies, tarps, generally less until permanent shelters are in place. If they probably figure that if things are going to be out there for a long period of time, like for the whole year, tarps ain't going to cover it. They don't like to see tarps, but you're better off having a tarp than nothing at all. Facility user group, looks like you're going through the process in the application process right now. And that might be the sector. Maybe they're referring to the sector, the facility user group might be sector X again. They're looking for a letter, which is printers, publishers, sector X. Nope. Well, you have to give me an email or something like that a little bit later on as you go through the process. Facility user group. Write that one down. Okay. And that's, I guess it's a wrap here. Like I said, I figured we'd be done before the hour was up. But I'll get back to the person who asked the question about the facility user group. When I see.
Yeah, I know who that is.
Okay, we'll get back to you guys. Yeah. Well, that's a wrap. And thank you for your attention.